Hi everyone, it's Alex, and I am back from a much-needed staycation with my friends that I mentioned in my past video, and I even got to see Kelsey, who some of you might be familiar with from whenever we did the mid-year book freakout tag, so it's always great to see her, and hopefully by saying her name out loud, that will pressure her to keep making bookish content on her YouTube channel, which I'll link down below. But with this staycation, I live in West Virginia, and even just traveling to a city that's only about 45 minutes from where I am, especially staying in a beautiful cabin in the woods, it really made me appreciate again my state's beauty and just being here, although really only in some areas. And really, with West Virginia, I'm actually the only state, I think, to my knowledge, that's entirely in the Appalachian region. And living in southern West Virginia, that actually puts me right at the center of the Appalachian region too. And I thought it was a great time while I was away that I found out I was recently tagged in something called From My Neck of the Woods tag, and I was tagged by Jasmine at Jasmine's Reads, and this was originally created by Kelly at Books I'm Not Reading. But to my understanding, this tag is all about just mentioning maybe 5 books that really seem to capture where I'm from or what that means to me, and I think it's really exciting. So the first book I wanted to talk about was The Empathy Exams by Leslie Jamison. The Empathy Exams is a collection of essays where Leslie Jamison talks about different parts of her life where I think, at least based on where she used to be a medical actor, which I think means that she would just relay symptoms to her body that med students would diagnose. But of course, judging by the title, you might recognize or assume that really these are all essays that convey some form of empathy and figuring out what that means to Leslie Jamison. And one of these essays in here is actually taking place in West Virginia, where Leslie Jamison is visiting an old friend that's unfortunately incarcerated, and he's staying in West Virginia. And so speaking of incarceration, that is unfortunately a popular occurrence here, mainly because of our drug problem with the opioid crisis where I live specifically in West Virginia. Although I think this guy in here, I think he's in for taxes, so I guess that's better maybe. But I think Leslie Jamison, what she does really well is that she articulates what it's like being an outsider traveling to West Virginia. So I'm going to read a passage from here. Heading down south I-79, I feel the border between Maryland and West Virginia as smooth highway turning to sandpaper. The land is beautiful, really beautiful. Endless lush forests, pristine and unblemished, countless shades of green on hills, layered back into drifts of fog. I start thinking maybe coal mining is just a notion someone had about West Virginia, or something they like to talk about on NPR. So some of you, maybe, when you think of West Virginia, you might think of coal mining, which is very true to our history, but that's actually much more in our past. Mainly, coal doesn't thrive as well anymore here, but where Leslie Jamison is talking about I-79, she's talking about in the town of Fayetteville, which is sort of coal country or coal county, although Fayetteville now is very, modern. It's like a very trendy, hip area since it's so close to the New River Gorge. But I really loved that essay in there. It's called Fog Count, and it really surprised me where it was taking place. So I highly recommend the Empathy Exams in general. The next book I wanted to talk about is actually a book I don't have and I also haven't read, but it is called Hillbilly Elegy by J.D. Vance. Being where I'm from, I actually heard about this book everywhere whenever it was published in 2016, and to my knowledge, it's about J.D. Vance. It's nonfiction, and it's talking about his life. It's a memoir talking about him growing up in Ohio and also in Kentucky. So really with the tri-state area I'm familiar with, and unfortunately how J.D. Vance's childhood was plagued by his mother being addicted to drugs, and specifically there's this instance where they're driving in a car together and she threatens to just crash them both along a hillside or something. But of course, J.D. Vance does grow up and he writes this book, and he also goes to Yale Law School, which is very impressive. But a lot of that, I think, I haven't read this so I can't say a lot about it, but there's certainly, I think, a lot of people attach this book to Trump during his campaign and trying to explain why, or J.D. Vance is sort of articulating why my area is so Trump heavy. I voted for Hillary though. I knew it wasn't going to work, but I did. But if anything, I think this book is also definitely talking about how in my area in West Virginia, education, in Vance's case going to Yale, that's like every parents' dream for their child to do better than them here. It's very pushed upon people to seek education. I know that where I went to university, it's one of the only 2 universities in this state that people feel like you actually have a chance to succeed if you go to these universities. And those universities aren't even very big. They're actually, I feel like, quite small compared to others. So a lot of it is this sort of generational gap where you have grandparents in one family that are old enough to have never had a type of education, and then people like me, like young enough to go out and have these opportunities. There's certainly this divide that makes things a bit complicated. And I feel like I can't do this video without also mentioning The Glass Castle by Jeanette Walls, and this is also nonfiction, and it also covers Walls' upbringing for at least a time in Welch, West Virginia, which is in southern West Virginia. And along with drugs, which seems to be a problem, although it's not prevalent in this book is much more about living in poverty and how hard that is, but also again reinforcing that generational family ties and how close family is here in this region in Appalachia, and how it's so costly to have that determine your whole future. This is a great memoir. It's one of the first I've ever read that really captivated me when I was younger. I probably read this when I was 15 or so, but I really loved it, and this is also taught a lot in our public education system here. Another book I have here, although I'm mentioning it a bit more briefly, is The Perks of Being a Wallflower by Chbosky. This is a story about Charlie, who's writing a series of letters about his family and his life and basically just growing up. But there's a part here, I think it was in Thanksgiving, where Charlie's actually traveling to his father's family, who apparently lives somewhere in maybe southern Ohio. Although Charlie also talks about his grandfather and how this is on his mom's side though, and how his grandfather had to work in the mills, which I would compare to like working in the coal mines here in West Virginia, and how he also talks about that divide about opportunity and having an education and not wanting to end up like him. Really, the point I wanted to talk about is that, again, I think it was Thanksgiving here, is that Charlie talks about his cousins and how he really only sees his cousins there wedged all in this small house together watching a small TV screen and watching Charlie's brother at a football game playing for Penn State. And that immediately reminded me of my great-grandma's house in Wayne County in West Virginia, which is like the backwoods where there's no civilization. I interpret it as very cozy, but it's also where I see all my cousins. But Charlie's cousins in here, again, I think this is when they're visiting Charlie's father's parents' house in Ohio, but they make a joke about a West Virginia unemployment line, which is kind of true because employment is very hard here, and it's just, I don't know, again reinforcing like J.D. Vance's memoir, how education is your way out of West Virginia or this region, like Charlie's brother in this case. And the final book I'll mention is Housekeeping by Marilynne Robinson. Housekeeping is a story of Lucille and Ruth and how basically horrible things are happening to them up until the point where they stay with their Aunt Sylvie. But yeah, right from the get-go, I think it's something like Lucille and Ruth's grandfather. He derails into a lake while on a train, and then their mother drives herself off a cliff. So very bleak. I will say that this is one of my favorite books, definitely somewhere in the top 10 of my whole reading life. But Marilynne Robinson writes with such effortlessness, and particular with this setting here in this book, it reminded me a lot of West Virginia, even though I think it's meant to take place somewhere in Idaho, I think. Although just reading the back here, I think there's a sentence that really captures me and made me really excited to read this book. It says here in the town of Fingerbone that it is a town chastened by an outsized landscape and extravagant weather, and chastened again by an awareness that the whole of human history had occurred elsewhere. And again, just thinking of outsized landscape, much like what Leslie Jamison was talking about with the beauty of West Virginia, although, again, that feeling that the world is occurring elsewhere, that's the perfect way to describe where I live. And it's just, it reminded me more than ever this past weekend when I stayed in that city in the cabin. It's just that West Virginia, people love to come here for a brief time, but it's like that place you know you don't stay forever because it's not great. I think the most recent news that West Virginia has gotten is actually with a Netflix documentary called Her-uh-cun, and it's actually taking place in the city I live, but it's about the drug epidemic. But it's also sort of positive because it's about these women that try their best to really resurge where I live based on the drug epidemic and trying to help any way they can. So those are all the books I have, and I was really excited to do this tag. I will also mention Kendra Winchester because she recently did a video about the Appalachian region with more Appalachian heavy books. And so now it's time to tag some people that I think I would at least be very nosy to know about what they would say with this tag. And I tag Katie at Books and Things, Wilson at Wilson Shugart, Natalie at Curious Reader, Juan at Just Juan Reader, Lukash at Totally Pretentious, Sean at Sean the Book Maniac, and Claire at Claire Reads Books. As always, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.